Here we are still, folks. Sure, a lot of people don't want us to be here. Why would you say that? Because we're engaged in telling people hard truths that many don't want to hear. Many of our lives are based on falsities or myths or twisted facts. We hear them from the time we're born. We grow up hearing them, thinking they're real, and only to find later, if we're intelligent, that they mean less than we thought and more. When I say less, I mean that they aren't factual. They aren't historical. They didn't really happen in this world, but only in the minds and the imagination of someone else. The thing that makes them more powerful is the message behind them. It is a message that can only be conveyed by the creation of myths, of stories, of fantasies, because the words fall short. History even falls short. These things help us move beyond the common thinking human being and transcend our understanding of the world, our understanding of the universe. A sort of bending back takes place, the type of bending back that is included in the word religion, which means bending back or turning back to the original. And so we engage in these various stories and myths, not necessarily to learn how to behave, but to be able to look at the mirror to see how humans behaved in the past. We can put ourselves inside each and every story and see how we would feel, how we would behave, what the correct action and the one that is incorrect would look like. We use these stories as living stories, not something cold, not something dead, not something that is translated by someone with their own agenda. The sad thing about today is that many of the religions of the day that use stories and metaphors have been captured by people who have a dualistic mindset. Their thinking abilities are much smaller. It's trapped in either or, up, down, in a little box, and their minds and imaginations cannot go anywhere beyond that box. And so it becomes uncomfortable to think. It becomes uncomfortable to hold two ideas that don't match in one's mind at the same time. It becomes uncomfortable, in other words, to think deeply, to feel deeply, and to know deeply. But we have to do that. I'm reminded of a debate by two people, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on, where one was an apologist for Christianity who was working hard to prove that the Bible was inerrant and all of it was historical facts. The other was a scholar of the Bible, ancient texts, anthropology, and archeology. And the one who was the apologist could shoot down some of the ideas and suggestions of the expert by just dismissing them or saying that they had been proven wrong when in fact they had not. He used all kinds of fancy words and all kinds of professional language so that the average human being could not understand. But when it came down to it, he wasn't telling the truth. This is what the expert, Paul Wallace, had to say about this.
The recent Billy Carson, Wes Huff debate.
Well, it was a very frustrating debate to watch. There were a number of subjects I would have loved to have heard discussed in that conversation, and the conversation sort of moved towards these topics and then never dealt with them. And I don't want to be personal about it, but I was frustrated with the moderation of it. The really interesting topics got brought up and then somehow got tripped over each time, and we never got onto the real topic. So, for instance, I would have been really interested to have heard a conversation between Billy and Wes about the idea that Jesus may have had a girlfriend or even a wife. But the conversation tripped up over the question of the Karen King fragment. Now, the Karen King fragment is a really interesting fragment of literature from the 300s. This is in the Gnostic period, and it's a text that refers to Jesus' wife. But unfortunately, when Billy raised the question of the fragment, initially Wes said he didn't know what texts Billy was talking about, and then once Billy repeated, I do mean what's called the Gospel of Jesus' Wife, this fragment found by Karen King, Wes's response is, oh, that's been debunked. And so we never got on to the discussion, but the fact is it has not been debunked. This is a fragment that was studied by Karen King, one of the world's leading experts in Gnostic sources. Karen King of Harvard University had analyzed this text and then submitted it to the Harvard Theological Review for them to examine and assess. And their conclusion is that there was no evidence that this was modern forgery at all. Now, there was still pushback. The Vatican immediately pushed back and said, oh, this can't be right. But they didn't have the fragment. They hadn't done the work. They were pushing back against the idea of it, which I find very strange, because the fragment only goes a fraction of an inch further than other sources that we have. Pistis Sophia, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. All those sources suggest Jesus had this close relationship with Mary Magdalene, and that it somewhat outsided some of the other apostles. There was this bit of conflict between Peter and Mary Magdalene, and the fragment only goes half an inch further than the Gospel of Philip, which tells us that Jesus would kiss Mary Magdalene frequently on the lips or on the mouth. But the word wife is what's used in this fragment, which is what put the wind up everybody, why there was this pushback. But it was not debunked. The Harvard Theological Review has not retracted its statement that there's no evidence of fakery or forgery. But what has been found is that the fragment we have is probably later than the original, because there are conventions of writing used in the fragment that are not ancient. And there's been some dependence suggested on the Gospel of Thomas, but that doesn't falsify it. The Gospels of Matthew and Luke are dependent on Mark. It doesn't falsify those documents. So the fragment is still very much in play, and has been for the last decade.
And so here we are, finding ourselves in a world where people who call themselves religious and Christian are willing to lie to save the faith, because they don't trust in the power of the God that they profess to be able to reach out, to draw people in through love and compassion. They feel that they have to do it for this God. And I think many of them have to do it for this God, because you see, the God they tend to worship and uphold is not the real one. The real one doesn't lie. The real one doesn't cheat. The real one doesn't steal. The real one doesn't support people going out and killing and murdering people who express their connection to God in a different way. The real one brings forth love, compassion, patience, all that is good in the world, and anyone who claims to follow that one and who is constantly bringing forth anger, hatred, negative judgments, and pure falsities does not follow that God, but the other God, the donkey-headed God. And so, as you listen to this video and as you look at Scripture and read Scripture and begin to study and prove yourself, study and show yourself approved, does it not say, a workman who need not be ashamed, dividing rightfully the word of truth? As you do that, which is the charge of any minister or Christian going out into the world, preaching the gospel of peace, be prepared to know that you are going to have to let go of some of those ideas you picked up, those things that you picked up as a child. But as you grow as an adult, you have to put away childish things and realize that the essence of it all is faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these three is love. Thanks for being with us. Hit the bell, subscribe. If you want to know the truth and hear the truth from someone who's not just trying to push his own agenda, join us. Namaste, everyone.